Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The matter of the secret path. I'm going to try and be as gentle as possible with you, using, wherever I can, parables, analogies, anything to try and explain the inexplicable. And it's inexplicable not so much because of the content of the lecture, but because of the world that we live in. And it's not a good idea to go home and talk to your friends and to others in a language which is just pie in the sky to them. And if you can pick up an analogy here or there, it helps. I want to just clarify the use of the word soul. We have to be very careful when we use the language indicating the nature of the self. The Buddhists, as I understand it, don't accept the existence of a soul. Alice Bailey used the word ego in terms of the soul. Many use the self. Brunton, Paul Brunton, a journalist who retired from the world to the Himalayas and wrote a magnificent set of works, he used the word overself, and others have too. I have already struggled with this problem in trying to form bridges with the Bailey readers and with the Theosophists and elsewhere. The Namanikāya's choice for this inner being is, in fact, the inner self, and I will attempt to use that in the future. Now I'm going to start with a story, and I have written it, and so it really reflects my attitudes as I have grown up in the esoteric, and doesn't negate any others who have had the same growing up in the esoteric, is not meant to negate anybody's ideas. I've called it the secret path. The secret path is a path inwards. It passes along a way that in some places is tortured with dangerous drops on each side. Sometimes it is steep, sometimes it is dangerous. In places there are wonderful views of the country and events below. Quite often the path is clouded over, and the way is not seen ahead. On occasions, you are brought to a standstill because of the hard going, and the weeds and the stones that trip you on that going. Rarely, very rarely, a guide will appear to tell you the way, or to warn you of indiscretions that herald disaster. The path leads to an inner reality, where dwells the inner self, whom some call the soul. The taking of the secret path is a reaction to our discovering that the outer world we live in is a letdown. The secret path is for those who find the material world Maya, an illusion. It is there, this world, there's no doubt about it, but the world we live in gives us false impressions, as I'm going to show you, if nothing else, today. The secret path that we take is a reaction to our discovering that the outer world has no future for us, offers no promise of immortality for ourselves or our loved ones. The secret path. The harder we look at the material world, the more we find that it is transigent, not permanent, and that everything we possess within it will be taken from us sooner or later, taken away by a variety of mechanisms, the least dangerous of which is death. It is as if we have long, long ago come away from a well-loved family and left behind us a warm and comforting home and journeyed into a far distant country, looking for something that is not clear to us at all. Far, far from our own home, whilst on the mission, we have become so settled in this new land, so far away from our homes. We've become so settled in this heavily structured country abroad, and so inured to its ways that we have, most of us, forgotten the land from which we came and the roots from which we have grown. Our origins are now dim to us, and we have forgotten why we should return there at all. Our spiritual roots in the world of the inner reality have been lost. Most of us have got to take the word of others that we are from a different land, one which is almost opposite in nature to the very solid one we are now in. And we have no knowledge of the way back, no certain knowledge of the way back to our origins. Only a few wise men and a lot of dusty old books can give us mere glimpses of that path, which has now, in any case, become very secret, kept secret lest the physical world laugh at it and degrade it, deliberately making it unattractive to us. Some of us want more confirmation of this supposed inner world of reality before we budge, or risk our homes and positions to go back there. Some of these wise ones say that we are princes from a great family, ancient and noble, a family that pines for our return, but under their strange laws are not permitted to come out and get us. We cannot believe that we could have been so misguided or stupid to have lost our way and to have ignored our roots. But by making an assessment of the world we now live in, we can grasp the true state of affairs and recognize parts of us that have been fashioned long ago in the land of our inner reality. Recognize parts of us that belong to the other world, the other reality, which is our home and where our true family lives. And so there are parts which do not belong here. Some have found that when they turn inwards, flashes of light, even images, can be picked up from that inner world. But most here think that such people are crazy. Some even claim to have evolved a whole science on how to get back to the inner reality, even if only for short periods, leaving their worldly bodies behind them for the moment. They call it meditation. Some sit at meditation for hours, some for just a few short moments. Whatever, Here, such persons are called mystics and are not regarded seriously. The secret path. Now, you need special equipment to navigate this path, and that's not unreasonable. If you climb a mountain, you need ropes and climbing boots. And those who have trod the path can even tell us what we need for it, for they have gone further along that path than we have. And we call this equipping ourselves, spiritual equipping. And I have drawn an analogy to the man who must sharpen, or the knight, the bold knight in shining armor surrounded with his spiritual inheritance. Such a person must equip himself, and he uses his sword appropriately. It's a two-edged sword, and we must all have it to tread the path. The one edge is required to hold the outer world at bay and to hack down its materialistic binds that bind people to its concept. The other edge of the sword is for use inwardly. For use inwardly to take us across the dangerous paths where, for some of us, and only a few of us, obnoxious entities exist, the dweller on the threshold, those ghost forms that plague alcoholics, and so on. The equipping of oneself. And so we say that this secret path is for the few who will equip themselves. For the path would be crowded with those who don't bother to equip themselves and just go on to it out of curiosity. Now, the language that I use is inadequate, even when it's in parable or story form. And so I have to teach with parable, as Jesus had to do when he spoke of the path. Parable means drawing analogies to, because we're unable to describe the path exactly. We use an example that is parallel to it, a parallel experience. For instance, the universal symbol, image for the path, image for teachings, the teachings which I'm giving out now, is bread. Food, if you like. Bread or food equals teachings. And when you have, if you're not a glutton, and when you have dreams, experiences inwardly of food, then remember that the food, if it is bad, is the wrong teaching that you're involved in. If it is old or sour or stale, then remember that the soul or the higher being, the inner self, is trying to tell you. The soul cannot think without an image, said Aristotle. The soul cannot think without an image. It's no good thinking that you're going to have little chats with your soul or your inner self. The soul, in the early days of the path of your unfoldment, communicates by means of image, and you must learn a universal language of images. How many of you would be able to put up two hands and say, I know 10 images in my dreams that mean certain things to me for sure? Very few of you, I'm afraid. The Claregate method teaches a vocabulary of images of thousands. Most people are like a bad typewriter. A typewriter with most of the keys broken. And they're trying to tap out a message to the higher self. And the higher self can only tap back a message through the same old typewriter, their brain, or their consciousness. And most of the keys are gone. So what you're trying to say is to put a word down as close, as accurate as possible to its true state and meaning. But you can't. You haven't got any images. You can't communicate. And so the keyboard is not complete. And many are like that. The food that we eat, which sustains us outwardly, is analogous to the spiritual teachings. To the spiritual teachings. That's why I say that the inner self will communicate with you if you are on the wrong path and studying rubbish. Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, fed his flock. He fed his flock. He fed them with the loaves of bread. And these loaves of bread were the teachings about the spiritual, about the secret path, the Sermon on the Mount. And the fishes that were distributed, well, fishes in astrology are 12th house, Pisces, the house of secrecy. Secret teachings, fishes and bread, hidden in the parable. Pisces, the fish, rules Christianity. But why secrecy? Why secrecy? Because you only give what is precious to the few and hide it from the rest. Now that's not unreasonable. If you lived in a land where the fire that you required to exist through, for cooking, for heating, for whatever, came from one single flame, a torch, who would you give the torch to protect, to look after, to guard? Who would you give that only torch in a land without fire to? Would you give it to some stupid person who might douse it? No, you wouldn't. As the Buddhists say, give a sword only to a fencing master, not to a novice. I have survived many tours of America. And the way that they pull their guns out and clean them and point them, things that I learnt when I was 12 and 13, and in the war, of course. Never point a gun. I saw a friend of mine shot right through the shoulder by some fool who picked a gun up and didn't know how to handle it. So they say, give a sword only to a fencing master, not a novice. Do not give a poem to a man who's not a poet. Now you must know, if poetry ever enthused you, that the biggest letdown of all is when you give something, a poem to somebody, and you say, look at this, read it. Well, what of it? Not a poet. We don't mean that he has to pour out poetry day after day. Don't give a poem to a man who's not a poet. Don't give teachings to those who are not earnest students. When you convert someone, and that's rare for me, when you convert someone, reveal only 1/3 of what you know. Reveal only 1/3 of what you know. Never give out the whole. Thus, what remains is always secret. The Buddhists. The duty of secrecy is to encourage the chela, the neophyte, the disciple, the follower, the aspirant, call him what you like, is to encourage the seeker to seek further. That's the point of the secrecy. Oh, that's great. Can you tell me more? Oh, no. Go and seek for yourself. It'll open his intuition. It'll develop his understanding of the rays. It will interest him in allied and so on. Don't tell all. Lead him on. Seed his thoughts. Seed the thoughts. If you have some proposition that you know this guy needs desperately, and you have it at your fingertips, don't give it to him like that. Seed it, little bits, and let the seed grow. And who is growing it and cultivating him? Because the seed is in his mind, and it's being cultivated by him as it should be. Seed his thoughts about his problem especially. But all this is only to ensure that he develops his own intuitive faculties in solving his problems. Don't tell all. If you do, how else will he develop those faculties? How else? I have to say this 100 times a month. How else will he learn if I don't be harsh on him? Sometimes you have to be harsh. Remember the clenched fist, the hard first ray of will and power. And you give it. And then, when you've made your point, the soft palm within, that you caress the individual's hurt feelings, and he can live with what you've done to him, may even grow from it. The divine mind, the mind of which our minds are just a pale image and a fragment, the divine mind is everywhere. The mind, it is said, is sleeping in minerals. The mind, it is said, is dreaming in plants. The mind is awakening in animals. And the mind can be fully awakened in man. Fully awakened. The mind of man can be the same, even if it's apart, as the mind of God can be fully awakened. Think about things in your life. Look around you. Take note of. Where came the beauty of the lines on a scallop's shell, a seashell? Where do the lines on the shell come from? Do they come from a fish without? From some seaweeds brushing it? No. From the tides hosing it with sand? No. None of these. The splendor of its lines comes from within it. Johnson calls it the imprisoned splendor, which we have to allow to come out. Why? Why not hog it all ourselves and get another few feet up the path with it? Because it is part of our duty to bring all those that we can along with us, our younger brothers, show them where the path is, help them along the first few feet, the steps, over the stones, and so on. The fully awakened man is the man who is returning to his source. And don't say, God, it's going to take me 50 lives to get along this path. The path is the goal. The path is the goal. Treading it is the goal in this life, in the next, whenever. The path is the goal. Not that the dewdrop slips into the shining sea and is lost forever, but rather that the dewdrop becomes the shining sea. What a difference in interpretation. Those who fear, oh, you will lose everything. I've got to lose my nature, my personality. When I tread inwards to the inner reality, I'm lost forever. No, not at all. The difference lies there. Rather that the dewdrop becomes the shining sea, and wherever that sea laps, the dewdrop is represented there. Very different from the other. Later on, I'll give you some examples of how words incorporated in pictures, diagrams, can act as analogies. I think one of the most astounding things about spiritual factors is their pervasiveness. The mind is everywhere. I've just given you an example of it. Plants and animals, it's there, it's there, it's there, it's everywhere. And this is true of many things, of compassion. All the qualities of the plane of Buddhi are there. And they are spiritual because they are from that plane, as is the quality of abstract thinking, and as is that manifestation of the divine which we call will, symbolized by the forefinger and Aries. The forefinger of God, will. And these things, these spiritual qualities, pervade the universe. It isn't that they're being sold at Marks and Spencer's. These factors are everywhere, and they are available to you, as surely as they are available to the plant and the animal and the mineral. It's a very hard lesson to learn that. The more educated you are, the less likely you are to learn it. I regret to confess, it's harder. I'm going to give you another little story about the pervasiveness of the essence of the self, of the inner reality as it is expressed through your inner self. When Svetaketu was 12 years old, he was sent to a teacher with whom he studied until he was 24. After learning all the Vedas, he returned home full of conceit, in the belief that he was consummately well educated and felt he was entitled to be critical of everyone. His father said to him, "Svetaketu, my child, you are so full of your learning, and so censorious with it. But have you asked for that knowledge by which we hear the unhearable? We hear the unhearable. We perceive what cannot be perceived, and know what cannot be known." What knowledge is that, sir? His father replied, "Many things are made out of clay, my son." And he waved his hand around the room to show the many objects of clay. "Many things are made out of clay, my son, but by knowing one lump of clay, all these things are known. The only difference is in the name we give them, these objects. For the truth is that they are all clay. So too is the knowledge of the one within us, the knowledge of all things." His son was nonplussed. He asked, "But surely my teachers, venerable as they are, must be ignorant of this knowledge, for if they had possessed it, they would have imparted it to me." But they did not. "Are you therefore going to give me that knowledge, father?" "Let it be thus," said the old man. "Now, son, bring me a fruit of the banana tree." Here is one, sir." "Break it open." "It is open, sir." "What do you see there?" "I see some seeds, sir, exceedingly small." "Break one of these." I've broken it, sir. What do you see there? Nothing at all, Father. The father said, my son, that subtle essence which you do not perceive there is that very essence that stands behind the growing of that huge banana tree. In that subtle essence which you do not see exists the tree's self. In such essence is your self, and you, Svetaketu, are that. Pray, sir, said the youth, tell me more. Be it so, my child. Now place the salt and water and come back to me tomorrow morning. The son did as he was told. The next morning the father said, bring me the salt that you put in the water. The son looked in the water, but could not find it, for the salt, of course, had dissolved. The father said, taste some of the water from the surface of the vessel. How is it? Salty. Taste some from the middle. How is it? Salty. Taste some from the bottom. How is it? Salty. The father said, throw the water away and then come back to me again. The son did so, but the salt was not lost, for salt exists forever. Then the father said, here likewise, in this body of yours, my son, you do not see the salt in it, nor do you see the true self there. But in fact it is there, it is within you. In that which is the subtle essence, all that exists has itself. And thou, Svetaketu, art that same self. You see how our ancestors had to express themselves in complete simplicity, but they could bring the meaning home. I knew a very famous yogi, probably the best known in scientific circles in the world, Swami Rama, who went into the Menninger Foundation in Topeka, Kansas, and offered himself for experiment, and there made nonsense of Western medicine. He slowed his heart down to a halt. He could raise tumors on any part of the body and then disperse them. He could raise and lower his blood pressure at will, and so on and so on. He said to me that when the mystery of man's mind is solved, man will quickly become perfect. And there are many contradictions about this mind. Even before we get to the subject of Maya, illusion, we grow up and let it grow wild. The mind, for most of us, is like an unruly adolescent. It answers us back, tells it what it wants, not what you want, not you, the possessor. You, the possessor of consciousness, suffering all the humiliation and pain of holding three bodies together in the personality, and then to be told by the mind that, no, I'm not going to do that. I've had enough for today. I'm not going to go through those columns of figures. If you try and push me through them, I'll make them wrong. Now, I say that deliberately because the moment that you get to understand that the mind becomes an entity, then you will begin to grasp him and discipline him. But for most of you, he's an unruly adolescent. And I'm sure you could all tell me how unruly adolescents can be. Now, the strange thing is the complementing nature of the mind, contradictory nature of it as well. Firstly, The mind is the cause of bondage in man. I've given you a little slab of it, how it can get out of hand, unruly. But it does more than that. It thirsts for things that you really shouldn't be wanting, as we shall see in a moment. It is the cause of bondage for man. We can't just switch the mind off and say, the pain is too much, stop it. No, the mind says, I'm going to enjoy this pain. You're going to lose the energy from it, but I'm going to enjoy it because it's a sensory experience. And then, alternatively, secondly, the mind is also the cause of liberation. And so we have this choice, either to be subservient to the mind, rushed around by it, depending on your rays, the ray of the mental body, or you can be liberated by means of the mind, by taking it in hand and controlling it. Now, A, the cause of bondage, comes through the mind's attachment to material things. Loves it, loves it. It's like saying, well, would you like acupuncture, which will take several weeks to work, but it'll make a good job, or do you want a quick drug that'll have you on your feet again tomorrow morning? And they'll quick drug every time. So the mind attaches itself to the material thing. But the other part of the mind loves detachment. And this is a little flower. You've got this unruly adolescent here, creating all hell. And then you have this lovely little flower that needs watering and fertilizing and coaxing. And every now and again you put your hands on either side of it and a stream of energy flows through it from one palm to the other. This is my negative one, that's my positive one. I don't want to hear what yours are. But you have the plant there and you can cultivate it. Now that's the other part of the mind. Let's get back to the crazy adolescent. The mind contemplates objects through its senses. The mind contemplates objects through its senses. I see it. It's long. This way, it's that way. And then you bring in the other senses. It smells like methylated spirits. And then, oh, it's a bit big for my fingers. I bet the point is too thick as well. And so you bring all the other senses in. The moment that you just put one little sensory perception into the mind, whoop, 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 all the senses are called in. And that's not the end of it, because all the senses have to be associated with each other. And the impressions have to go to different areas of the brain, and most of the brain that is occupied is taken up by the sensory parts. And so the mind becomes attached to objects. I don't know what I'd do without my car. Must have it. I'm 2 miles from where I work. The mind likes the car, to kick out of that, occasional swearing and traffic jams and so on. All these things suit the mind down to the ground, where in actual fact you could begin to curb things like that and say, no, I'll walk. And you give your heart a treat. The heart's chakra is ennobled by this action of yours, and the little flower spurts of it. So, at its worst, the adolescent becomes attached to objects. And we begin to forget the land that we came from. Because the mind's on the stage. And no one else is going to get a show, and least of all things like the voice of the silence, or purity or virtue, the things that the inner reality calls for from us. If you have a prosthesis put into your chest, an artery replaced with a piece of tubing to bypass the whatever in the heart, it's quickly forgotten. You think that you are a complete person. You forget that you have part of the not-self, that world out there inside you, which you've now identified as your own. Or you have a tooth capped, or a bridge put in, or something like that. And after a while, you've lost memory of the fact of, oh, which tooth was it? Which part of the... It's become part of you. And that's what's happened for hundreds and hundreds of lives. We become so involved in material things that we have identified ourselves with the material world and forgotten from where we came. I can't put it any easier than that. Now let's get back to the other part of the mind, the little plant that is growing. The path is the path to liberation, and the mind is the walker. As the mind, as you walk the path, you tread the path inwardly, the mind is the walker, and the mind is changing. It's going to change from attachment to non-attachment. It's going to change from a lower triad into a higher triad. Lower manas into higher manas. So you don't let the mind get its own way if you are cultivating that little plant which is going to flower. When man's mind flowers, it's only in bud, then he will have achieved perfection. And the mind of man is embryonic. And so the mind thrives on the activity of the senses. You cut down on sensory input and the mind will be slowed down because it has depended on the senses' input. Now when people go into a flotation tank, fine, nothing wrong with that. No one's arguing about that. But the mind, no longer fed by the senses, of which it is now deprived, disconnected from the senses, rushes around looking for places where it can get sensory experience. I can't see, I can't taste anymore, I can't hear anything. And so the mind is looking for something to feed it. And it is then that the mind looks into other planes. Oh, that looks like a human being. Yes, I can recognize that. And the danger then of the flotation tank is that the mind may be introduced to new fields which may be equally uncontrollable. If you could guarantee by getting into a flotation tank that you would be introduced to Plato or somebody like, fine. The mind loves to elaborate on the input of the senses and is ever generating thoughts from them. Now there's the key to everything that I'm saying here. The mind loves to elaborate on the input of the senses. The moment something comes in through one of the senses, or some of them, the mind elaborates on it. Sitting there quietly, hoping you're going to get a meditation in, you hear a door bang. The moment that happens, the mind's on it straight away. Banging door, who is it? How long will he be here? Does he really want to see me? Can I ignore it? And so on. And all these thoughts are in the place where you would like to put something from your inner reality.